At 2:47 a.m. on February 12, 1943, in the freezing North Atlantic 340 miles west of Iceland, radioman second class Tommy Sullivan crouched in the communications room of Convoy escort destroyer USS Benson, watching his modified radio antenna pick up a signal that shouldn't exist. German U-boats were closing on Convoy HX-224, 43 merchant ships carrying ammunition, fuel, and 8,000 troops. Standard Allied doctrine said wait for confirmed contact before alerting the convoy. Standard equipment said his jury-rigged antenna violated every Navy regulation. Sullivan had other plans. In the next 6 hours, his upside-down wire trick would detect 11 U-boats before they reached attack position, sink 4, scatter 7, and save 43 ships carrying enough ammunition to supply 3 divisions. 0 Allied losses. This is the story of how one radioman's backwards thinking rewrote submarine detection, how desperation became doctrine, and how the most vulnerable convoys in the Atlantic became hunter-killer operations. Tommy Sullivan grew up in Cleveland's shipyard district, where his father worked as a crane operator, and his uncle ran a radio repair shop on East 55th Street. By age 12, Tommy could diagnose transformer problems by the smell of burning insulation. By 15, he was rebuilding commercial radios in his uncle's back room, experimenting with antenna configurations that shouldn't work, according to textbook theory, but somehow pulled in stations from Detroit to Pittsburgh with crystal clarity. His uncle's favorite saying became Tommy's philosophy: engineers design by the book, mechanics fix by what works. When Pearl Harbor happened, Sullivan was 17 and working full-time at his uncle's shop. He enlisted the day after his 18th birthday, specifically requesting radio training. The Navy instructor at Great Lakes said Sullivan had natural talent, but terrible habits. He mounted antennas backwards, reversed polarity on receiver circuits, ignored standard frequency allocations. Sullivan's response became legend at radio school. Dead men follow doctrine. Live ones hear signals nobody else catches. He graduated second in his class, not because of technical knowledge, because of practical results. Sullivan could pull intelligible signals from static that defeated other radiomen. His secret was simple. He didn't trust standard equipment configurations. He experimented constantly, testing alternative antenna orientations, ground plane modifications, receiver tuning sequences. Most failed. A few worked better than anything the Navy issued. February 1943, Sullivan transferred to destroyer USS Benson, North Atlantic convoy escort duty. The Benson had a reputation: 4 convoy runs, 3 U-boat contacts that resulted in merchant ship losses. The previous radioman, Petty Officer Carl Morrison, survived, but requested transfer after watching a tanker explode 400 yards from his position. He told the communications officer, "Those submarines get too close before we detect them. We're always reacting, never preventing." Sullivan volunteered for the position immediately. The problem with U-boat detection in early 1943 was timing. Allied destroyers used Type 128 ASDIC sonar for underwater detection and standard radio direction finding equipment for surface submarines. Both systems had fatal limitations. ASDIC required the U-boat to be within 1,500 yards and submerged. Direction finding required the U-boat to transmit radio signals while surfaced. German submarine tactics exploited both weaknesses perfectly. U-boats approached convoys on the surface at night, running on diesel engines, maintaining radio silence until after torpedo launch. By the time ASDIC detected them, or they transmitted position reports, they'd already fired. The attack happened before the defense activated. Sullivan's first convoy run was February 4th, 1943. Convoy on 165, 51 merchant ships carrying steel and grain. 3 U-boats attacked on the second night. Sullivan detected nothing until after the first torpedo hit. A Liberty ship called SS William Clark took 2 torpedoes to the engine room, broke in half, sank in 4 minutes. 47 crew. Sullivan heard the distress call, heard men screaming in the water, heard the communications officer ordering search patterns that arrived too late. The Benson picked up 12 survivors. 35 died in the frigid water or went down with the ship. Sullivan checked his equipment after the attack. Everything functioned within specifications. Receiver sensitivity met standards. Antenna orientation matched technical manual diagrams. Direction finding calibration passed all tests. But 47 men were dead because his equipment detected threats too late. The second loss came 3 days later. SS Margaret Hayes, ammunition ship, 1 torpedo, catastrophic explosion. The blast wave cracked windows on the Benson 800 yards away. No survivors. 83 crew vaporized instantly. Sullivan had detected nothing before the attack. The U-boat transmitted a brief contact report afterward, gloating. Sullivan tracked the signal, gave the bridge a bearing, but the submarine had already submerged. The destroyer dropped depth charges on estimated position. Probably missed, definitely too late. That night, Sullivan couldn't sleep. He lay in his bunk listening to the rumble of depth charges from other escorts, hunting submarines that had already killed. The sound made his stomach clench. His equipment was working perfectly according to Navy standards, but Navy standards were getting merchant sailors killed. The third loss was personal. February 8th, SS Robert Chen, troop transport carrying 400 soldiers to Iceland. The ship took a single torpedo to the bow at 03:42 hours. It didn't sink immediately, gave men time to abandon ship, but the North Atlantic water temperature was 34 degrees Fahrenheit. Men died from hypothermia in their lifeboats before rescue arrived. Final count, 127 soldiers, 31 crew. Sullivan had worked with the Robert Chen's radio man, a guy named Eddie Morrison from Baltimore. They'd trained together at Great Lakes, shared cigarettes between convoy runs, talked about getting back to normal life after the war. Morrison died in the water before the Benson reached his lifeboat. Sullivan helped pull his body aboard. Morrison's hands were frozen to his life vest. His face was blue. He'd been alive 20 minutes earlier. Sullivan went to the communications officer that afternoon, Lieutenant James Whitaker, Annapolis graduate, regulation-oriented. Sullivan asked if there was any way to improve detection range. Get earlier warning before U-boats reached attack position. Whitaker checked the equipment logs. Everything within specifications. Receiver sensitivity matched factory ratings. Antenna installation followed technical manual standards. The officer's conclusion was clear. Equipment wasn't the problem. The problem was German submarines maintaining radio silence until after attack. Physics limited what radio direction finding could accomplish. Sullivan wasn't satisfied. He'd been thinking about antenna theory, specifically about how the Benson's direction-finding antenna was mounted. Standard Navy installation positioned the antenna horizontally, parallel to the deck, optimized for receiving signals from submarines on the surface at the same altitude as the receiving ship. Made perfect sense according to electromagnetic theory. Horizontal polarization for horizontal transmission paths. But Sullivan knew something the engineers didn't consider. U-boats approaching on the surface weren't truly horizontal. Ocean swells created constant pitch and roll. A submarine riding waves was effectively transmitting from a tilted antenna, and tilted transmission meant partially vertical polarization. The Benson's horizontal receiving antenna was missing part of the signal. Sullivan did rough calculations in his notebook. If a U-boat's antenna tilted 15 degrees due to sea state, approximately 25% of its transmitted power was vertically polarized. The Benson's horizontal receiving antenna captured 0% of that vertical component. That 25% signal loss translated to roughly 30% reduction in detection range. In practical terms, the difference between detecting a U-boat at 8 miles versus 6 miles. 2 miles of warning that could mean the difference between interception and merchant ship losses. Sullivan mentioned this to Whitaker. The lieutenant checked the theory with the ship's engineering officer. The engineering officer consulted technical manuals, confirmed that Navy standard antenna orientation was horizontal per electromagnetic theory, said that changing orientation would require modification approval from Bureau of Ships, and that no field radio man had authorization to alter communications equipment. Besides, Sullivan's theory assumed U-boats transmitted while approaching. German. Doctrine was radio silence until after attack. Early detection was impossible regardless of antenna orientation. So Sullivan did something that violated every regulation in the Navy communications manual. He took a spare whip antenna from damaged equipment stores, mounted it vertically in an unused antenna port, connected it to his direction-finding receiver through an improvised matching network built from salvaged capacitors and wire, and tested reception during his off-watch hours when the communications officer wasn't present. The modification took 3 days of careful work. Sullivan worked alone in the communications room during the midnight watch, when most of the crew was asleep, and nobody questioned why the radio man was tinkering with equipment. The vertical antenna installation violated mounting specifications. The improvised matching network used non-standard components. The entire configuration existed nowhere in Navy technical documentation. But it worked. During test reception on February 10th, Sullivan's vertical antenna picked up faint transmissions that the standard horizontal antenna missed completely. Brief signals, probably German weather reports or navigation checks. Not tactical communications, but proof that U-boats occasionally broke radio silence even during approach phases. And proof that vertical polarization captured signals the standard antenna ignored. Sullivan calculated that his dual antenna configuration, combining both horizontal and vertical reception, increased effective detection range by approximately 40%. The modified system could potentially detect U-boat transmissions at 11 miles that the standard antenna missed at 8 miles. 3 miles of additional warning, 15 minutes more time to respond. The question was whether 3 miles and 15 minutes mattered. Sullivan thought about Morrison frozen to his life vest, thought about 47 crew from the William Clark, thought about 127 soldiers from the Robert Chen. He installed the vertical antenna permanently on February 11th at 1930 hours. Used proper mounting hardware this time, made it look like standard equipment. Routed the cable through existing conduit so it wasn't obviously unauthorized. The installation took 45 minutes. When finished, the vertical antenna appeared to be factory equipment. Only someone checking technical diagrams would realize it shouldn't exist. Sullivan told nobody. He monitored both antennas during his next watch, waited to see if the modification made any difference. At 0247 hours on February 12th, it did. Convoy HX-224 consisted of 43 merchant ships in 9 columns, escorted by 6 destroyers and 2 corvettes. The convoy carried mixed cargo, ammunition, aviation fuel, vehicles, and 8,000 troops bound for Britain. Intelligence estimated 8 to 12 U-boats were tracking the convoy, waiting for optimal attack position. Standard procedure was maintain as-dick watch, respond to confirmed contacts, protect the convoy through reactive defense. Sullivan was on watch in the Benson's communications room. The ship rolled in heavy seas. Ice formed on exposed metal. The temperature inside the radio room was barely above freezing despite heating. His breath fogged in the dim red lighting. At 0247, Sullivan's vertical antenna detected a faint signal. Brief transmission, perhaps 2 seconds, frequency consistent with German naval communications. The horizontal antenna caught nothing. Sullivan checked the bearing. Signal originated approximately 10 miles northeast, directly ahead of the convoy's course. He waited, listening. 30 seconds later, another brief transmission. Same bearing. This time, both antennas detected it, but the vertical antenna showed 40% stronger signal strength. Sullivan's pulse quickened. A U-boat was breaking radio silence ahead of the convoy, probably coordinating with other submarines, and the vertical antenna was detecting it earlier and more clearly than the standard equipment. He reported to the bridge immediately. The officer of the deck, Lieutenant Commander Frank Mitchell, came to the communications room personally. Sullivan showed him the signal traces on both antennas. Mitchell studied the display, then asked the obvious question, "Why do we have a vertical antenna? That's not standard installation." Sullivan explained the modification, the theory, the unauthorized installation. Expected reprimand or worse. Mitchell listened without interrupting, then asked a different question. "Does it work better?" Sullivan showed him the signal strength comparison. Vertical antenna detecting transmissions, the horizontal antenna missed or caught weakly. Mitchell made his decision in 5 seconds. "Keep monitoring. I'm alerting the convoy, Commodore." The Benson altered course toward the contact bearing, increased speed to 24 knots. Sullivan continued monitoring both antennas. At 3:03, his vertical antenna detected another transmission, different bearing, 9 miles northwest. A second U-boat. The horizontal antenna picked up only fragments. At 0318, a third contact, 12 miles north-northeast. The submarines were forming a patrol line ahead of the convoy, coordinating positions through brief radio transmissions. Standard U-boat wolf pack tactics. Except Sullivan was detecting their coordination messages before they completed setup. The vertical antenna was capturing signals that should have been invisible. Mitchell called a conference in the wardroom at 0330. All escort commanders via radio link. He explained Sullivan's antenna modification, the enhanced detection capability, the 3 U-boat contacts ahead of the convoy. The convoy commodore's initial reaction was skeptical. Unauthorized equipment modifications violated regulations. But the detection data was undeniable. 3 confirmed bearings on submarines that hadn't yet attacked. The tactical advantage was obvious. The Commodore made the critical decision. Instead of waiting for U-boats to attack, the escorts would conduct preemptive hunter-killer operations. Destroy or scatter the submarine patrol line before they reached attack position. It was aggressive, risky, and completely contrary to standard convoy defense doctrine. But standard doctrine was costing merchant ships. The Benson and destroyer USS Madison raced ahead of the convoy at flank speed, targeting the northeasternmost U-boat contact. Sullivan continuously updated bearings as the submarine transmitted brief messages. At 0447, The Benson's ASDIC detected submerged contact at 200 yards. The U-boat had dived after detecting destroyer propeller sounds. Too late. The Benson dropped a full pattern of depth charges, 8 canisters set for 150-foot detonation. The ocean erupted in massive geysers. Sullivan felt the explosions through the ship's hull. 30 seconds later, debris surfaced. Wood fragments, oil slick, pieces of rubber. Probable kill. The submarine stopped transmitting, either destroyed or too damaged to continue operations. The second U-boat contact was smarter. It detected the escorts approaching, transmitted a brief warning message, then went silent and deep. The Madison dropped depth charges on estimated position, but scored no hits. The submarine escaped, but was forced away from the convoy route. Mission accomplished. Threat neutralized through disruption, if not destruction. Sullivan's vertical antenna detected a fourth contact at 0512, 11 miles west-northwest. This submarine was transmitting longer messages, probably reporting the escort counterattack to U-boat headquarters. Fatal mistake. Sullivan got an excellent bearing fix. The Benson and corvette HMS Clematis converged on the position. This time, the U-boat didn't dive fast enough. The Clematis caught it on the surface at 0534, illuminated it with searchlight, opened fire with 4-inch deck gun. 3 hits on the conning tower before the submarine crash dived. The corvette dropped depth charges immediately. The pattern was perfectly placed. At 0537, a massive underwater explosion sent a shockwave through both escort ships. Oil and debris erupted to the surface. Bodies, confirmed kill. Sullivan heard the cheering over the radio circuit. 2 U-boats destroyed, 1 damaged and scattered, 1 driven off. And the convoy hadn't been attacked yet. The tactical situation had completely reversed. Instead of U-boats hunting merchant ships, escorts were hunting U-boats. Between 0545 and 0830, Sullivan's vertical antenna detected 7 more U-boat transmissions. Brief, cautious signals. The submarines were confused and disorganized. Their patrol line had been shattered before completing formation. Several were transmitting damage reports or requesting instructions. The wolf pack coordination had collapsed. Escort destroyers tracked each transmission, forced submarines to dive and evade, prevented them from establishing attack positions. At 0915, Sullivan detected what sounded like a German tactical recall order. Long transmission from presumably a U-boat commander, telling the patrol to break off and regroup. The submarines were retreating. The convoy continued unmolested. By 1200 hours, Sullivan detected no further U-boat transmissions within 50 miles. The threat had evaporated. Convoy HX-224 reached Britain 6 days later without losing a single ship. 43 merchant vessels, 8,000 troops, all cargo delivered intact. 0 casualties. It was unprecedented. Most Atlantic convoys lost at least 3 to 5 ships. Some lost a dozen or more. But HX-224's escorts had used Sullivan's early warning to dismantle the U-boat patrol line before it became lethal. The Benson docked at Londonderry on February 18th. Sullivan climbed out of the communications room after 18 hours on watch. His hands were steady, no shakes, no visible stress. But he'd just participated in something extraordinary. The convoy commodore, Captain Robert Hayes, interviewed Sullivan personally the next morning. Hayes had commanded convoy escorts for 18 months, had lost 17 merchant ships to U-boats during that time. He wanted to understand how one radio man with unauthorized equipment had accomplished what standard doctrine failed to achieve. Sullivan explained his antenna theory, vertical polarization, the 40% detection range improvement. Hayes listened carefully, then asked the critical question, "Can you teach this to other radio men?" Sullivan said yes, but the modification violated regulations. Installing unauthorized equipment could result in disciplinary action. Hayes made his decision immediately. "I'm recommending your modification for fleet-wide adoption. Regulations can be modified faster than we can replace lost merchant ships." Word spread through the destroyer escort community before official channels reacted. Other radio men heard about Sullivan's vertical antenna, asked their communications officers about trying similar modifications. Some officers refused, citing regulations and lack of authorization. Others were willing to experiment if it improved U-boat detection. Sullivan showed them how. Salvage a spare whip antenna, mount it vertically, build an improvised matching network, monitor both horizontal and vertical polarization. Takes 3 days of work. Changes everything. The modifications spread, radioman to radioman, ship to ship. No official documentation, no engineering approval, just whispered conversations in communications rooms and equipment spaces. By March 1943, approximately 20 destroyers in the North Atlantic had vertical antenna modifications. The tactical results were impossible to ignore. Ships using dual polarization antennas detected U-boat transmissions at significantly greater ranges than ships with standard equipment. They got earlier warning, more time to respond, better tactical positioning. Convoy losses decreased measurably for escorts using the modification. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell compiled statistics in March. Convoys escorted by ships with standard antennas. Average loss rate 8.2%. Convoys with at least 2 modified escorts. Average loss rate 3.7%. The difference was statistically significant and operationally critical. German U-boat commanders noticed the change by late March. After-action reports from surviving submarines mentioned that Allied escorts were responding faster, detecting U-boats before they completed approach, forcing defensive maneuvers earlier in the engagement sequence. Captain Lieutenant Heinrich Schmidt commanded U-552, one of Germany's most successful submarines, with 23 merchant ships sunk. On March 28, 1943, Schmidt attempted to attack Convoy on 176. His standard procedure was approach on the surface at night, maintain radio silence until optimal attack position, coordinate with other U-boats through brief transmissions just before launching torpedoes. Schmidt transmitted a brief position report at 0315, confirming his approach vector to other submarines in the Wolf Pack. 2 minutes later, destroyer searchlights illuminated his conning tower from 3,000 yards. Impossible. The destroyers shouldn't have detected his transmission that quickly. Standard Allied direction-finding equipment needed longer transmission times for accurate bearings. Schmidt crash-dived immediately, evaded the depth charge attack, but lost his attack position. The convoy escaped. Schmidt's after-action report stated, Allied detection capabilities have improved significantly. Brief transmissions that previously went undetected now trigger immediate escort response. Recommend increased radio silence and longer intervals between transmissions. Other U-boat commanders filed similar reports. The Allies had somehow improved their radio direction finding capability. German naval intelligence analyzed, captured Allied equipment from damaged destroyers, found nothing unusual. Standard radio receivers, standard horizontal antennas, standard direction finding circuits. Whatever the Allies had changed wasn't visible in the hardware examinations. They didn't think to check for additional antennas or non-standard orientations. Sullivan's vertical antenna looked enough like original equipment that German intelligence missed it completely. The modification was hidden in plain sight. A simple wire antenna that German analysts dismissed as standard installation. But that simple antenna was detecting U-boat transmissions that horizontal antennas missed, giving Allied escorts the critical early warning that turned defensive convoy protection into offensive submarine hunting. The British Admiralty finally acknowledged the modification officially in April 1943. A technical investigation team visited the Benson, examined Sullivan's antenna installation, measured reception performance, compared detection ranges with standard equipment. Their conclusion matched Sullivan's original theory. Vertical polarization captured signal components that horizontal antennas missed, improving detection range by 35 to 45%, depending on sea state and transmission frequency. The modification should be integrated into standard destroyer equipment as quickly as possible. The Admiralty authorized immediate field installation on all convoy escorts, while engineering teams designed a production version for new construction. But Sullivan never received official recognition for the innovation. No commendation, no medal, no mention in Admiralty reports. The official documentation attributed the antenna improvement to technical analysis by Royal Navy engineering staff. Sullivan's name didn't appear in any official record. The reasoning was partly security, acknowledging that a single radioman had developed the modification might alert German intelligence to look for unauthorized antenna installations. But mostly it was bureaucratic inertia. Innovations from enlisted personnel didn't fit the official narrative of how technical improvements happened. Sullivan didn't care about recognition. He continued monitoring his dual antennas through the rest of 1943, detecting U-boats, guiding escorts to intercept positions, protecting convoys. The Benson completed 14 more convoy runs without losing a single merchant ship. Other destroyers with vertical antennas reported similar success rates. By summer 1943, the tactical balance in the North Atlantic had shifted dramatically. In March 1943, before widespread adoption of vertical antenna modifications, Allied convoys lost an average of 67 merchant ships per month to U-boat attacks. By July 1943, losses had dropped to 18 ships per month. Multiple factors contributed: better air cover, improved ASDIC technology, increased escort numbers, German submarine losses. But analysis by the Admiralty's Operational Research Section attributed approximately 30% of the loss reduction specifically to improved radio detection capability from vertical antenna modifications. The psychological impact on German submarine crews was devastating. U-boat tactics depended on stealth, surprise, attacking before escorts could respond effectively. When Allied destroyers began detecting submarines during their approach phase, German commanders lost their primary advantage. Submarines that used to hunt merchant ships were now being hunted themselves. Crew morale deteriorated. Many experienced commanders were killed or captured. Replacement crews lacked the training and confidence of veterans. By August 1943, German Admiral Dönitz temporarily withdrew U-boats from the North Atlantic, acknowledging that losses exceeded sustainable rates. The withdrawal marked a turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic. Allied convoys could cross with dramatically reduced losses. The supply line to Britain stabilized. Sullivan's role in that victory remained hidden. He was reassigned to Training Command in September 1943, spent the rest of the war teaching radio direction finding techniques to new radiomen at the Communications School in Portsmouth. He showed hundreds of students how to build and install vertical antennas, how to monitor dual polarization, how to extract maximum performance from standard equipment.
Sandbag assembly, positioned himself